Abraham Reed straightened the display of luxury watches, his fingers lingering on the platinum timepiece worth more than what most people earned in a year. At 32, he owned one of Chicago's most exclusive boutiques, catering to clients who thought nothing of dropping six figures on a shopping spree. From the imported Italian marble floors to the crystal chandeliers, everything in Reed Luxury Emporium spoke of wealth and success, a far cry from the foster homes he'd grown up in. "Mr. Reed," his assistant Alicia appeared at his elbow, "your 10 o'clock appointment has arrived."
The couple interested in the private collection? Abraham nodded, straightening his custom-tailored suit. "Show them to the diamond room."
The diamond room was reserved for his most exclusive clients and highest value investments. Abraham had built his business from nothing, securing venture capital from investors who had initially laughed at the idea of a young black man from the foster system breaking into the luxury market. Now those same investors were begging for a stake in his rapidly expanding company. As he approached the room, Abraham reviewed the client notes on his tablet.
The Sewells, a wealthy older couple looking to invest in rare pieces for their collection.
Mrs. Sue was particularly interested in vintage watches, while Mr. Sue favored limited edition fountain pens, high net worth clients with excellent credit ratings, potential for a long-term business relationship.
Abraham put on his practiced smile and opened the door. And then the world stopped.
The woman sitting on the plush velvet sofa was in her late 50s, her blonde hair cut in an elegant bob, diamond studs glittering in her ears. She was discussing financial management options with her husband, a distinguished man with silver hair. They looked up when Abraham entered. The coffee cup in the woman's hand crashed to the floor, spilling dark liquid across the pristine white carpet. Those eyes. Abraham knew those eyes. They were his own. He'd seen that face before in a single worn photograph he'd kept hidden in his wallet since he was 8 years old. The social worker had given it to him reluctantly, saying only, "This is your birth mother. She gave you up when you were 3 days old." Abraham had memorized every detail of that face, wondering what kind of woman would look at her newborn child and walk away, especially when that child was born with a different skin color than her own. And now here she was sitting in his store wearing a necklace worth more than his first investment property, looking at him like she'd seen a ghost. Clarice, her husband, touched her arm.
"Are you all right?"
But Clarice Sue couldn't speak. Her face had drained of all color as she stared at Abraham. Her lips formed a word, no, a name, though no sound came out.
"Forgive me." Abraham found his voice.
Years of business training kicking in despite the earthquake happening inside him.
"Mrs. Sue, Mr. Sue, I'm Abraham Reed, owner of Reed Luxury Emporium. Welcome to my establishment."
The room felt too small, the air too thin.
25 years of questions rose in his throat, threatening to choke him.
25 years of wondering why she'd given him up, why she'd never looked for him, why he hadn't been worth keeping. Clarice Sue's hands trembled as she set down her purse. "Abraham," she whispered, and the sound of his name and her voice sent a jolt through him. She knew. She recognized him, which meant she hadn't forgotten him, hadn't erased him completely.
Mr. Sue looked between them, confusion evident on his face. "Clarice, do you two know each other?"
A loaded silence filled the room. Abraham could hear his own heartbeat, could feel sweat beating at his temples despite the carefully regulated temperature.
His entire business reputation was built on control, on presenting an unshakable image of success.
But now, faced with the woman who had given birth to him, who had abandoned him, that control was slipping away.
Clarice stood up shakily.
"Richard, I need to speak with Mr. Reed privately." "But the investment pieces we came to see, please," she said, her voice breaking.
"Just give us a few minutes." Richard Sue looked bewildered but nodded, stepping out of the room.
As the door closed behind him, Abraham and Clarice faced each other across a gulf of 25 years.
"How did you find me?"
Abraham asked, his voice hardly above a whisper. Clarice shook her head, tears welling in her eyes.
"I didn't. We had no idea. We're new to Chicago. Richard's company merged with a firm here.
We heard about this store from friends.
Saw the pieces in your collection."
Her voice trailed off.
I never thought, I never imagined. Abraham's mind raced. What were the chances in a city of millions? What were the odds that the woman who had abandoned him would walk into his store? Was it coincidence or something else?
You recognized me, he said flatly. After all these years, I would know you anywhere, she whispered. You have your father's face, but your eyes, she swallowed hard.
Those are mine.
His father.
Another mystery. Another blank space in his life.
The social workers had never mentioned him.
Why? The question escaped before Abraham could stop it.
A lifetime of carefully constructed barriers threatened to crumble in an instant.
Why did you leave me?
Clarice reached into her handbag with trembling fingers and pulled out her wallet. From it, she extracted a worn, faded photograph.
She held it out to Abraham.
Because they told me you died, she said, her voice breaking. 25 years ago, they told me my baby died. Abraham stared at the photograph in her outstretched hand. In it, a much younger Clarice held a dark-skinned newborn, her face radiant with love despite obvious exhaustion.
Written on the back in faded ink, Clarice and Abraham. Day 2.
The floor seemed to shift beneath Abraham's expensive Italian shoes as everything he thought he knew about his life, about his abandonment, suddenly came crashing down around him.
Who had lied and why? Someone told you I died?
Abraham's voice echoed in the diamond room. The exclusive space suddenly feeling like it was closing in around him. 25 years of believing he'd been abandoned, discarded like something unwanted. And now this woman, his birth mother, was claiming she'd been told he died.
Clarice's hand trembled as she clutched the photograph.
I was 19 when I got pregnant, she began, her voice hardly above a whisper.
My family, they didn't approve.
Nicholas, your father, was studying medicine on scholarship. He was brilliant and kind, and his skin color didn't matter to me, though it mattered very much to my parents.
Abraham's throat tightened.
The financial empire he'd built, the millions in assets he managed, the market success he'd achieved, none of it had prepared him for this moment. My father was a doctor, would have been, Clarice said, tears welling in her eyes. There was an accident during his clinical rotation, a drunk driver.
He died 2 months before you were born.
Abraham leaned against the display case trying to process this new information. His father hadn't abandoned him, had never even known him.
My parents cut me off financially when I refused to terminate the pregnancy, Clarice continued.
I worked at a diner until I was 8 months along. Then I moved into a charity home for unwed mothers. She stopped, a faraway look in her eyes. When you were born, you were perfect, so beautiful. I named you after Nicholas's grandfather. The door opened and Richard Sue peered in cautiously.
Clarice, is everything all right?
Richard, Clarice said, her voice steadying.
This is going to sound incredible, but this is Abraham, my son.
Richard's face went blank with shock. But you said, I know what I said. Clarice cut him off. What I was told, but look at him, Richard. Look at his eyes. Richard Sue studied Abraham's face for a long moment, then slowly nodded.
My God, he whispered. The resemblance is unmistakable.
Abraham straightened, the businessman in him reasserting control. Perhaps we should continue this conversation somewhere more private. My office is upstairs. 10 minutes later, they were seated in Abraham's corner office. The Chicago skyline spread out below them like a carpet of opportunities. The room reflected his success, modern art on the walls, a desk made from rare Amazonian wood, and a small display case containing his first investment, a vintage Rolex he'd bought at a pawn shop and later sold for enough capital to start his business.
What happened after I was born?
Abraham asked, pouring 3 glasses of water with hands that refused to remain steady. Clarice took a deep breath. I had complications, hemorrhaging. They took you to the nursery while they worked on me. When I woke up hours later, a doctor, at least I thought he was a doctor, told me there had been an issue with your heart. She closed her eyes briefly.
That you hadn't made it.
Richard rested his hand on Clarice's shoulder in a gesture of comfort.
I was sedated in and out of consciousness. They showed me a death certificate, said they'd taken care of everything. Clarice's hands twisted in her lap. I was devastated, alone. My parents wouldn't even take my calls. I couldn't afford a lawyer to ask questions.
But you kept the photograph, Abraham said quietly.
It was all I had left of you, of Nicholas.
She reached into her purse again and pulled out a small velvet box.
And this. I've carried it with me for 25 years.
She opened the box to reveal a simple gold band with a small diamond.
Nicholas bought this with his first stipend from medical school. We were going to get married after he graduated.
Abraham stared at the ring, trying to imagine the young couple, the futures they'd planned, the lives they never got to live together, the family he should have had.
What happened to you?
Clarice asked, her eyes searching his face.
If you didn't die, where did you go?
Abraham leaned back in his chair, memories flickering through his mind.
I was in the foster system, moved around a lot.
The record said my mother was white, father unknown, and that you'd relinquished rights when I was 3 days old.
Voluntary surrender, they called it. Clarice shook her head vehemently. No, I never signed anything like that. Never.
Her voice broke.
I would never have given you up.
You were all I had left of Nicholas.
Richard cleared his throat.
Clarice, this sounds like someone falsified documents.
That's criminal fraud. Abraham had built his business on analyzing risk and identifying opportunities.
His mind worked methodically even as emotions threatened to overwhelm him.
The hospital, what was it called?
Lakeside Medical Center, Clarice replied. It closed years ago.
There would still be records, Abraham said. Birth certificates, death certificates.
Those are filed with the county.
Clarice's face had gone pale. Someone stole my baby. She whispered. They took you from me and made me believe you were dead. The implication hung heavy in the air between them. Who would benefit from such a deception? And why?
I need to make some calls, Abraham said, reaching for his phone. He had contacts in the city records department, people he'd met through various business ventures and charitable contributions. As he dialed, his mind raced ahead. If they could find the original records, they might discover who had orchestrated this. 25 years was a long time, but documents left trails.
Money left even more distinct footprints. Sandra, it's Abraham Reed. I need a favor.
After explaining the situation, he hung up and turned back to Clarice and Richard.
She'll search the records and get back to me. It might take a few days.
Clarice dabbed at her eyes with a tissue Richard had handed her. All these years, she murmured.
I've carried your loss with me every day. I donated to children's hospitals in your memory.
I started a scholarship fund in Nicholas's name for minority medical students.
Clarice works in non-profit now.
Richard explained. After we married, she channeled her grief into helping others. Abraham felt something shift inside him. The rigid narrative he'd constructed about the woman who'd abandoned him was crumbling.
When did you two meet?
15 years ago, Richard said. I was a widower with 2 teenage sons. Clarice was running a fundraiser for the Medical Scholarship Foundation.
Clarice smiled sadly. Richard knew about you from the start.
I told him I'd lost a child. Abraham nodded slowly, trying to reconcile this new reality with the one he'd lived with his entire life. The investment he'd made in his anger, in his sense of abandonment, it had shaped his ambition, his drive to prove himself worthy.
How much of his success had been built on a foundation of lies told by others? I have questions, Abraham said. About my father. About you? About what happened?
Of course, Clarice replied, leaning forward eagerly.
Anything?
Before Abraham could continue, his phone buzzed with a message.
It was from Alicia.
Mr. Reed, Mr. Vincenzo is here for your 11:30, says it's urgent regarding the merger negotiations.
The Vincenzo merger, a $50 million deal that would expand Reed Luxury into the European market.
Abraham had been working on it for months, courting investors and securing financing. I have an important business meeting, he said, standing.
We understand, Richard said, rising as well. Business obligations are important. Can we meet again?
Clarice asked, her voice tinged with desperation.
Please, I just found you.
Abraham hesitated. For years, he'd fantasized about confronting the mother who abandoned him, demanding answers, showing her what she'd thrown away. But this woman before him wasn't that person. She was a grieving mother who'd been told her child was dead. I have dinner plans tonight, he said slowly. But tomorrow, I'm free after 5.
Clarice's face lit up. Yes, tomorrow we're staying at the Lakeside Grand downtown.
As they prepared to leave, Clarice paused, then stepped forward and pressed the small velvet box into Abraham's hand. This belongs to you now, she said softly.
Your father would have wanted you to have it.
The weight of the box in his palm sent an unexpected surge of emotion through Abraham. This small token connected him to a man he'd never known. A man who had never abandoned him, who had simply never had the chance to be his father.
Thank you, he managed to say.
After they left, Abraham stood at his office window, staring out at the city that had both challenged and rewarded him.
The Venenzo meeting would begin in minutes.
He needed to focus, to be the sharp, confident businessman who had built Reed Luxury into what it was today. But his mind kept returning to Clarice's words.
Someone stole my baby. If that was true, if someone had deliberately separated him from his mother, then who? And why? What could anyone have gained from tearing apart a grieving young woman from her newborn child?
Abraham slipped the velvet box into his pocket as his assistant knocked on the door, announcing Mr. Vincenzo's arrival. He straightened his tie, took a deep breath, and turned to face his business obligations.
The merger discussion would require his full attention and negotiating skill.
But somewhere in the city, documents were being searched, and Abraham knew that whatever those records revealed, his life would never be the same again. What he didn't know was that those records would expose a conspiracy that reached far closer to home than he could possibly imagine.
The Venenzo merger negotiations dragged into the evening, forcing Abraham to reschedule his dinner plans.
By the time he returned to his penthouse apartment in the Gold Coast neighborhood, it was past 9. The skyline glittered outside his floor-to-ceiling windows, the city's wealth on display like a portfolio of premium stocks. Normally, he took pride in being part of that skyline, in the fact that he'd built something substantial from nothing. Tonight, however, the view only reminded him of how fragile success could be, how quickly foundations could shift. Abraham loosened his tie and pulled the small velvet box from his pocket, his father's ring for his mother, an investment in a future that had never materialized. He opened it, studying the modest diamond that had represented such hope for the young couple. His phone rang, jolting him from his thoughts. Abraham Reed, he answered, setting the ring box on his glass coffee table.
Mr. Reed, it's Sandra from Records.
Her voice sounded strained.
I found something, but it's complicated. I don't think we should discuss it over the phone. Abraham frowned. What's wrong?
Some of the files appear to have been altered. And there's a name in these documents.
Someone connected to the hospital administration at the time. Someone I think you might know. A chill ran down Abraham's spine. Who?
Victor Sanchez.
The name hit Abraham like a market crash.
Victor Sanchez, his first major investor. The man who had mentored him, who had opened doors when every bank had turned Abraham away. The venture capitalist who had believed in Reed Luxury when it was nothing but an ambitious business plan. That can't be right, Abraham said, his voice tight.
I'm looking at his signature, Mr. Reed.
He was on the hospital's board of trustees in the late 90s. Abraham sank onto his sofa, mind reeling.
Send me everything you found immediately. Already done. But there's something else.
She hesitated. A nurse who worked in the maternity ward back then, Beatrice Porter. She still lives in Chicago.
I found her address. Abraham grabbed a pen. Give it to me.
After ending the call, Abraham downloaded the files.
Sandra had sent birth records, death certificates, board meeting minutes.
As he scrolled through them, his hands grew clammy. There it was, Victor Sanchez's name, appearing repeatedly in hospital administrative documents from the year Abraham was born. Victor, who had first approached Abraham 7 years ago after reading a small newspaper article about the young entrepreneur's plans to open a luxury boutique. Victor, who had taken an almost fatherly interest in Abraham's career, who had introduced him to high society clients and investors. Victor, who had known exactly who Abraham was all along. But why? What possible motive could the wealthy businessman have had for separating a mother from her child 25 years ago? Abraham changed into casual clothes and grabbed his car keys. It was late to be making unannounced visits, but this couldn't wait. Beatrice Porter lived in a modest neighborhood on the south side. If she had been working in the maternity ward when he was born, she might have answers. 40 minutes later, Abraham stood on the porch of a small bungalow ringing the doorbell. Lights were on inside, and after a moment, the door opened to reveal an elderly woman with silver hair and suspicious eyes. Mrs. Porter. Beatrice Porter. Yes. What do you want at this hour? Her voice was sharp, defensive. My name is Abraham Reed. I was born at Lakeside Medical Center 25 years ago. I believe you were working in the maternity ward at that time. The woman's face drained of color. Without a word, she tried to shut the door, but Abraham was quicker, wedging his foot in the gap. Please, he said, I'm not here to cause trouble. I just need to know the truth. I don't know what you're talking about. Her voice trembled. A baby boy born to a white mother named Clarice Sue. The mother was told her baby died, but the child ended up in foster care instead. Abraham kept his voice level, though his heart pounded. I am that child, Mrs. Porter. Please, what happened to me? For a long moment, the elderly woman stared at him, her eyes searching his face. Then slowly, she released her grip on the door. I've been waiting for this day, she said quietly, wondering if it would ever come. She led him into a small living room filled with family photographs and knickknacks, the accumulated treasures of a long life. She gestured for him to sit, then lowered herself carefully into a recliner. It was wrong, she began without preamble. What they did was wrong, and I've carried that knowledge like a stone in my heart for 25 years. What happened? Abraham leaned forward. Your mother hemorrhaged after delivery. It was serious. She needed surgery, blood transfusions. While the doctors were working on her, you were taken to the nursery. The old nurse's hands twisted in her lap. There was nothing wrong with you. You were perfect. But 2 days later, Dr. Milner came to the nursery with Mr. Sanchez. They took you away. And then we were told to inform your mother that you had died from a congenital heart defect. Abraham felt sick. Why? Why would they do that? Beatrice shook her head. Money, influence. Mr. Sanchez was powerful. He made significant donations to the hospital, sat on the board. No one questioned him. She paused. There were rumors that he and his wife couldn't have children, that they had been trying to adopt but had been rejected because of his age. Are you saying he took me for himself to adopt me? Abraham's voice rose with disbelief. No. Beatrice looked confused. You went into the system. I know because I checked. I was troubled by what happened. You were placed in emergency foster care. This made no sense. If Sanchez had wanted a child, why not take Abraham home? Why consign him to foster care? There's more, Beatrice said, her voice dropping. A week after you were born, a woman named Tina Sanchez was admitted to the psychiatric unit, Victor's wife. Abraham frowned. I don't understand. Neither did I at first, but later, a colleague who worked in that unit told me Mrs. Sanchez had suffered a psychotic break after losing a baby at 7 months. She had been carrying the child for her daughter who couldn't conceive. Abraham's mind raced trying to connect these fragments. Her daughter, Victor's stepdaughter, from his wife's first marriage. Beatrice's eyes held his. A young woman named Olga. Abraham felt as though the floor had dropped away beneath him. Olga Sanchez became Olga Carter, my foster mother when I was 8, the only one who ever tried to adopt me.
Beatrice nodded slowly.
Yes, Olga Carter. She worked at the hospital, too, in administration, but she left shortly after the incident with your mother. The pieces were beginning to align, forming a picture that made Abraham's stomach turn. The adoption fell through, he said numbly. After 2 years with her, the social workers suddenly decided she wasn't suitable. I was moved to another home. Victor Sanchez controlled everything, Beatrice said, including the social services in this city. If the adoption was stopped, he had a reason.
Abraham struggled to process this information.
But why would he approach me years later?
Invest in my business? Act as my mentor? Beatrice looked genuinely puzzled. That I don't know.
By then I had left the hospital, lost track of the Sanchez. Abraham stood and paced the small room. So Victor Sanchez orchestrated my separation from my birth mother. Made her believe I was dead, then had his stepdaughter foster me years later, only to block the adoption.
He stopped, turning to face the elderly nurse. None of this makes sense. What was the endgame?
I'm sorry, Beatrice said.
I only know what I witnessed.
The rest, she shook her head.
But I saved something. She rose stiffly and crossed to a small desk in the corner. From a drawer, she removed a yellowed envelope. Your hospital bracelet. I kept it, thinking someday someone might come looking for the truth. Abraham took the tiny plastic band with hands that weren't quite steady. Baby boy Sue, it read.
Proof of his identity, proof of the crime committed against him and his mother.
Why are you coming forward now? Beatrice asked.
After all these years, my mother walked into my store yesterday, Abraham said quietly.
Pure coincidence.
She recognized me immediately.
Beatrice's eyes widened. Clarice Sue, she's here in Chicago.
Yes.
And tomorrow I'm meeting her again.
Abraham carefully tucked the hospital bracelet into his pocket.
Thank you for telling me the truth.
As he drove back to his apartment, Abraham's mind churned with questions. Victor Sanchez had been like a father to him since they'd met, had funded his first store, had introduced him to the luxury market investors who had helped Reed Emporium expand globally. All the while knowing exactly who Abraham was, knowing what he had done to Abraham and his mother.
But why? What did Victor gain from any of this? And why resurface in Abraham's life after all those years?
Back at his apartment, Abraham spread the documents across his dining table, arranging them chronologically like a financial portfolio analysis: his birth, his supposed death, his entry into foster care, Victor's signatures on hospital board documents, Olga's employment records, and then the most disturbing connection of all. 7 years ago, just before Victor approached Abraham for the first time, Clarice Sue had been hired as the executive director of the Sanchez Foundation's educational initiatives. It was no coincidence.
None of it was. His phone rang again. This time it was Clarice. Abraham, I hope it's not too late to call, she began hesitantly. No, it's fine.
He glanced at the documents spread before him, wondering how much to share.
I wanted to tell you. I've been thinking about our meeting. There's something I didn't mention.
Her voice wavered.
Something about where I'm working now. Abraham's grip tightened on the phone.
The Sanchez Foundation. A startled silence.
How did you know? We need to meet tonight if possible. Abraham checked his watch.
Nearly midnight or first thing tomorrow.
What's wrong?
You sound the man who told you I died, who took me from you. I think it was Victor Sanchez.
Clarice gasped audibly. Victor! But that's impossible. He's been my boss for years.
He's treated me like family.
I have proof, Clarice.
And there's more.
Much more.
Abraham closed his eyes briefly.
Do you know his stepdaughter, Olga?
Of course. She runs the Foundation's international programs. She's the one who hired me originally. Another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. We need to talk privately, away from the Sanchez, away from anyone connected to them.
Abraham, you're frightening me.
I'm sorry, but after what I've learned tonight, he took a deep breath. Don't trust anyone associated with the Sanchez family.
Promise me. There was a long pause. There's a small cafe near the Art Institute, Sculptor's Garden. Can you meet me there at 7 o'clock tomorrow morning? I'll be there.
After hanging up, Abraham returned to the documents.
Somewhere in this tangled history was the answer.
The reason Victor Sanchez had orchestrated this decades-long deception that had shaped the lives of so many people. What Abraham didn't realize was that the most shocking revelation was still to come and that someone was already working to ensure those secrets remained buried forever. Abraham arrived at Sculptor's Garden Cafe at 6:45 a.m., choosing a table in the back corner with a clear view of both the entrance and the rear exit. He'd barely slept, spending most of the night examining the documents Sandra had provided and researching the Sanchez family's complex financial history. What he'd discovered had only deepened his unease. Victor Sanchez hadn't always been wealthy. 25 years ago, he'd been a mid-level hospital administrator married to Tina, a woman from a prominent Chicago family. Tina's fortune had been substantial, but tied up in a trust that limited Victor's access. The trust had specific provisions about heirs, stipulating that if Tina died without children or grandchildren, the bulk of her estate would revert to her extended family.
The timing was suspicious.
Shortly after Abraham's birth and his separation from Clarice, Victor had made his first major investment, a move that had ultimately led to his current status as one of Chicago's wealthiest venture capitalists.
The cafe door opened and Clarice entered, scanning the room anxiously.
She was dressed casually in jeans and a blouse, her blonde hair pulled back. When she spotted Abraham, her face lit up with that same look of wonder he'd seen in the diamond room. "I was afraid you might not come," she said, sliding into the seat across from him.
"I've been here 20 minutes, Abraham replied, pushing a cup toward her. "I ordered you coffee. I wasn't sure how you take it." "Black is fine."
She wrapped her hands around the cup.
"You said you had proof about Victor."
Abraham nodded, retrieving a folder from his briefcase. "Before we get to that, tell me how you came to work for the Sanchez Foundation."
Clarice frowned slightly.
"It was about 7 years ago.
I was working for a small non-profit in Boston focused on educational equity.
Out of nowhere, I received a call from Olga Carter, that's her professional name, though she's Victor's stepdaughter. She said she'd seen an article I'd written about scholarship opportunities for underprivileged students and was impressed with my work. And the foundation just happened to be starting a new education initiative," Abraham guessed.
"Yes, exactly." Clarice looked surprised. "How did you know?"
"Because 7 years ago, Victor Sanchez approached me about investing in my first luxury store. He said he'd read about my business plan in a small trade publication."
Abraham leaned forward. "Don't you see the pattern?"
"He deliberately sought both of us out, brought us into his orbit." Clarice shook her head in disbelief.
"But why? What could he possibly gain?" "That's what I've been trying to figure out." Abraham opened the folder and spread out several documents. "This is a copy of my birth certificate. This is the death certificate that was shown to you.
And these," he pushed forward several pages of hospital board minutes, "show that Victor Sanchez was directly involved in administrative decisions at Lakeside Medical Center at the time I was born."
Clarice's hands trembled as she examined the documents. "My God," she whispered, "the death certificate? It looks so official. I never questioned it." "There's more." Abraham hesitated, then continued.
"When I was 8 years old, I was placed with a foster mother named Olga Carter. She tried to adopt me, but the process was mysteriously derailed after 2 years."
"Olga Carter is Victor's stepdaughter." Clarice's face paled. "No, that can't be coincidence." "It's not."
"Last night, I spoke with a nurse who worked in the maternity ward when I was born. She confirmed that Victor and a doctor took me from the nursery and arranged for you to be told I had died." Clarice pressed a hand to her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. "Then she hired me, knowing who I was, knowing what had been done to me."
"I believe so." "Yes. But why? Why separate us only to bring us back into their lives years later? Before Abraham could respond, his phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Richard, Clarice's husband. Clarice is not answering her phone. Is she with you? Need to speak with her urgently. Abraham showed Clarice the message. She frowned, checking her own phone. It's on silent. I have 3 missed calls from him. She quickly dialed Richard's number. As she spoke with her husband, Abraham noticed a man enter the cafe, tall with silver hair and an expensive suit. The man glanced around casually, but there was nothing casual about the way his gaze lingered on each patron. Abraham tensed, instinctively recognizing security personnel when he saw them. Richard sounds upset, Clarice said, ending the call. He says, someone broke into our hotel room last night. My laptop is missing along with my foundation files. Abraham's eyes remained on the man who had now positioned himself near the entrance. We need to leave now. What? Why? Don't look toward the door, Abraham said quietly. But I think we're being watched. Clarice's eyes widened. By whom? My guess, Sanchez Security. Abraham quickly gathered the documents, returning them to his briefcase. Is there anything on your laptop that might connect to the situation? Anything about me or my mother? I don't think so. Clarice started, then stopped abruptly. Wait. After we met, I was so shocked. I did some searches on you, your company, and I opened some old personal files, journal entries from when I was pregnant, a scanned letter from Nicholas, photos, which means whoever has your laptop now knows you've made the connection to me. Abraham stood, leaving cash for the coffee. We're going out the back way. They exited through the kitchen, ignoring the startled looks from the staff, and emerged into an alley behind the cafe. Abraham led Clarice quickly toward Michigan Avenue, where morning crowds would make it easier to disappear. Where are we going? Clarice asked, struggling to keep up with his long strides. Somewhere we can talk safely. Abraham flagged down a taxi, giving the driver an address on the west side. 20 minutes later, they arrived at a nondescript brick building. Abraham punched a code into the security panel at the entrance, then led Clarice to an elevator. What is this place? She asked as they ascended. My first investment property, Abraham explained. I bought this building when I started Reed Luxury. The top floor is a private office I keep separate from my main business. No one associated with Victor knows about it. The elevator opened directly into a loft space with industrial windows overlooking the city. One wall was lined with filing cabinets, another with vintage watches and jewelry in display cases. Abraham's earliest inventory. I need to call Richard, Clarice said, pulling out her phone. Use this instead. Abraham handed her a prepaid cell phone from his desk drawer. Your phone might be compromised. While Clarice spoke with her husband, arranging to meet him at a different hotel, Abraham booted up a computer that wasn't connected to his company network. He inserted a flash drive containing copies of all the documents he'd gathered. Richard's moving to the Palmer house, Clarice said, ending the call. He thinks we're being paranoid, but he's going along with it. Good. Abraham gestured for her to sit. Now, I need to show you what I found last night about Victor's finances. He turned the screen toward her, displaying a series of financial records and investment timelines. 25 years ago, Victor made his first major market play, acquiring a struggling pharmaceutical company called Gentech Laboratories for a fraction of its value. Within a year, Gentech stock had increased tenfold after they received approval for a breakthrough cancer treatment. Clarice frowned. I don't understand what this has to do with us. The treatment was based on research by Dr. Nicholas Brownell. You're Nicholas, my father. Clarice's hand flew to her mouth. That's impossible. Nicholas was still in medical school. He was doing research alongside his clinical rotations. According to university records, he was working on an experimental treatment using modified immune cells, what we now call immunotherapy. His supervising physician was Dr. Robert Milner. The same doctor who helped take you from the nursery. Clarice whispered. Abraham nodded grimly. After Nicholas died, his research apparently disappeared from the university. 8 months later, Gentech filed a patent application for a remarkably similar treatment. Dr. Milner was listed as a consultant on the application.
They stole his research, Clarice said, her voice hardening with anger.
They stole his work after he died. I think it goes deeper than that. Abraham pulled up another document. This is Tina Sanchez's trust agreement.
If she died without heirs, most of her fortune would go to her family foundation, not to Victor. But there was a provision for any grandchildren; they would receive a significant portion outright. Clarice's eyes widened as she began to understand. So, Victor and Olga needed a grandchild for Tina, Abraham confirmed. I think the original plan was for Olga to adopt me, establishing me as Tina's legal grandchild and securing their access to her fortune.
But why take you from me in the first place? Why the elaborate deception? Abraham tapped the screen.
Because of this clause, any natural-born grandchild with a proven genetic connection to Tina Sanchez shall receive priority inheritance status.
Clarice shook her head, confusion evident on her face. But you weren't related to Tina. No. Abraham agreed.
But DNA testing wasn't advanced 25 years ago. With the right documents and enough money changing hands, establishing a proven genetic connection wouldn't have been difficult, especially with Victor controlling the hospital records.
This is monstrous, Clarice whispered. They were going to use you to steal Tina's fortune.
But something changed, Abraham continued.
The adoption fell through.
I was moved to another foster home.
For years, I couldn't understand why. Olga seemed to genuinely care for me. If the plan changed, what happened to Tina's money? That's where it gets interesting. Abraham displayed another document. Tina died 15 years ago.
The bulk of her estate went to the family foundation as stipulated, but a significant portion, about $30 million, was placed in a separate